Ever since I can remember, I've always been terrible at communicating with other people. A lot of it has to do with growing up in a place where my differences at the time were unacceptable, and as a result, I really didn't have any friends. So, I never had anyone to talk to, and I'd never really had any way to learn how to talk to people. As I got older, I of course picked up on some techniques to deal with talking to people, but ultimately, it didn't really matter since I'm just naturally soft-spoken, and oftentimes people misinterpret how I am in any social settings. Since I didn't have any friends, I spent most of my time relishing in my hobbies, which is reading and of course video games. Games just in general have always been a hobby that brings me immense joy, if only because for just a short while I don't have to be myself, or at the very least, I can see how the story of someone else plays out. As I played more and more games, I began to think about who I am as a person, and I started to see who I was, or rather, who I thought I was in certain characters, with special mentions going to Yuna from Final Fantasy X, or Lucas from Mother 3, who showed me that even the shyest people can be just as powerful. By now, you may be wondering what this has to do with Journey. After all, you did click on this video expecting that. But what I said earlier has a lot to do with Journey, albeit in a somewhat roundabout way. You see, Journey has had one of the most profound impacts on me. In a sense, it taught me one of the most valuable lessons I have ever learned, and it gave me the inspiration and courage to try things I never thought I would. So, for today's game stage, I'd like to do a retelling of a speech I gave in one of my college classes, my first ever playthrough of the video game Journey. As the game opened, I found myself in that familiar desert I'd seen so much in the promotional trailers and art. I tried my best to know as little as I possibly could about the game, and all I really knew was that the game was straightforward and there was some sort of unique multiplayer mechanic to it. I made my way through the introduction part, getting adjusted to the controls and learning what I was capable of doing. Very simple stuff, as expected. I'd only really played the demo to flower by this point, so I had no idea of what to expect from these developers, and I honestly didn't mind. I was willing to try something new. As I messed with the controls, I found that when I held circle I could make little chimes, or if held longer, very large chimes. Seemed a bit silly to me, but I liked the idea of it at least. I wandered my red-hooded figure through various ruins, and finally I made my way to the first major place. In front of me was a secluded area with lots of rocky areas surrounding me. From the initial camera, I picked up pretty quickly that I was supposed to get across this chasm, so it was time to explore. As I wandered around, something curious caught my eye in the distance. I spotted another red-robed individual. I knew they must have seen me too because we both ran at each other. As I approached, I beeped at him a couple times. He responded with a couple himself. And this must be another player, I thought. I felt my stomach churn a little. My natural social anxiety was kicking in, and I started to worry a bit more about how I might perform. I'd really hoped he was new at least, so then I wouldn't feel as bad as if I messed up. We wandered around this area, eventually finding more symbols that made our scarf longer, which allowed us to fly higher and glide farther, and we found out that we had to use our chirping powers to make some fabric normal again, which formed a bridge. But as I wandered to the next cloth, I saw the edge of my screen had a white outline on one side. As I turned in that direction, I saw the other hooded figure chirping quickly. I walked over to him to see what he was chirping about, and lo and behold, he'd found a symbol power-up we'd both missed on our first excursion. We both helped each other to climb up the sandy waterfall to get it, and eventually we made our way across the bridge. As we were wandering up the bridge, I began to notice that this particular hooded figure always stuck around me and never wandered ahead of me. I had figured most people might just leave me behind, or just ignore me altogether, but he never once did. He would occasionally chirp at random, and I would chirp back, and sometimes it even worked the other way around, where I would initiate it, and on cue, every single time, he would always respond. Each time it happened, a smile would cross my face, knowing that we both intrinsically understood what we were trying to do. On our adventure together, we encountered a sprawling desert where we freed many of these strange cloth-like figures that I started to think of as dogs, even though they could fly. During most of this, I allowed my hooded friend to take the lead, as I was a bit too nervous to lead both of us, and he didn't seem to mind. In the back of my mind, though, I had that constant thought that I'd just get left behind, which I should have expected. After all, it's the internet, so people are more inclined to do that, right? But this person, he never once did that. As we traveled, I started to notice some patterns from him. He would chirp constantly to always indicate he found something, and he would always seek me out to show me. I caught on quickly and did the same in return. If he got too far ahead and we lost sight of each other, he would always seek me out and lead me in the right direction, or, at the very least, what he thought was the right direction. After cool sequences in the game, we would jump around and chirp loudly in excitement. One time, he walked around me in circles and stood in place. I worried he might be leaving, but he came back shortly while I waited patiently for him. He'd even managed to tell me when he was going away from the game for a bit. I had caught on to his personality within the first 30 minutes, and I was completely engrossed in this game. For the first time, I had warmed up to someone. We had established a line of communication that, although small, was more than enough for us to both overcome the trials ahead. Of course, I knew I could play this game alone. I knew that this game wasn't difficult in the slightest. Years of playing games teaches you to pick up on things like that. But I had stopped caring about those base instincts, and I wanted to continue my journey with this friend. And even though I knew the game wasn't difficult, as we started to make more progress, I started to get a sense of dread. We entered a series of dark ruins and watched as a giant stone snake-like monster destroyed a bunch of red cloth and the light it shined on its head came into contact with. This was the game telling us, for the first time, that there would be danger, and we'd have to do everything we could to avoid it. We approached that section, and I instinctively walked to the side to try to get a better angle on the situation, but my friend didn't quite catch on. He ran straight into the middle, and I watched helplessly as the snake monster's light engulfed him and rammed straight into him, ripping off half his scarf and limiting his power. If this were any other game, I would have just seen that as a mild inconvenience. But I was in shock, and my instinct to help him took over, and I ran towards him, chirping loudly to try and indicate I was worried. As his character picked himself up, he finally decided instead to follow me since he was hit. Suddenly, I had become the leader between the two of us, and I had to guide us to safety. I kept to the sides just to be safe, and I navigated us past the snake monster with relative ease. Shortly after, however, I made a terrible lapse in judgment, and I watched as the snake monster came right at us. I had just barely made it out, but my friend was not so fortunate. He was engulfed by that light again, and without even thinking, I tried to do something, as if to try and take the light instead. I knew this was a stupid move. I knew that I couldn't actually do anything, and I knew the way this gameplay mechanic worked. And yet, I still reacted this way. And so I watched as both of our characters this time were slammed by the beast, and our scarves torn. After we'd finished this area, my friend had little scarf left, possibly around 2 or 3 little squares, while I was fortunate to have a decent amount left. Our roles in this game had switched, and I was made to be the new leader of our group. But thankfully, the next part was a breath of fresh air as we had a chance to relax from the intense area before this, and even this far into the game we kept up our communication. In fact, we'd gotten so good at it that we always stuck together no matter what, and we were pretty good at finding things too. I had finally made a connection with this person, and I couldn't have been happier. This respite would be short-lived, however, as we entered into the final area of the game, the snowy mountains. We both had always seen our destination looming over us, and I knew we were getting close. During the windy section at the beginning, my friend picked up on when to move a lot quicker than I did, and I ended up falling constantly behind, getting blown back by the powerful wind. A bit of apprehension finally struck me. This was the first time I'd had any major difficulty with progressing, and he was doing so flawlessly. I cursed my lack of basic skill for this section, since I knew it wasn't difficult. I was just making rookie mistakes. He got farther and farther, and that apprehension grew, and I thought he might just leave me behind. But, to my surprise, I watched as he turned around and ran straight towards me, obviously running backwards. He had actually come back for me, and instead took the reins and guided me, albeit slower than he had done so through this part. I was in shock. We had no way of verbally communicating, through text or chat or otherwise, and we didn't know each other's usernames to send messages. And yet, he was still making every attempt to keep going with me. Surely he must have known that he didn't need to do that, but with his help and a feeling of embarrassment from myself for not being able to complete this part as quickly as he could, we both made our way together across the frozen landscape. As we moved forward, the atmosphere and music began to grow more and more foreboding, really bringing home the idea of this being the final area in the game. As we trudged our way through the snow, a terrible snowstorm hit, and we found some very small and abandoned ruins ahead of us. As I walked inside, I noticed the camera angle had moved upwards. I instinctively stopped to look around, and as I did, a giant snake monster from the prior ruins shone its light directly overhead from where I was. Unfortunately, my friend had wandered ahead, and once again he was struck by the light. In that same instant, I had tried to also leave the ruins to tell him to come back, but it was too late, and we were once again struck by the beast. We made our way through this new area slowly and carefully. At times, I would make a bad call and run when I shouldn't, and I would take a hit. My friend expectedly ran towards me, and later on the same would happen to him, and I would run to him. By this point, both of us had lost our scarves entirely, and I felt even more powerless than I had before. I was too scared to ever leave my friend's side, realizing that without him, this loneliness would be far worse. His companionship had kept that feeling from ever becoming a real threat. And so, we made our way through the final areas, and onto yet another severe snowstorm. We both kept together, but our chirps became weak and feeble, to the point of being practically inaudible. And so, we walked forward, moving slower and slower, but never moving far away from each other. And eventually, I watched as my friend fell forward into the snow, and as I walked towards him, I did the same. After the amazing and beautiful cutscene that followed, I was in awe at the scene before me. I gleefully began to fly forward into the amazing and beautiful landscape in front of me, but as I moved forward, my thoughts immediately went back to my friend, and unfortunately the smiles would not last long. No matter where I had panned my camera or looked, I couldn't find him. In that moment, I panicked. I didn't know what to do or where to look. I knew the edge of the screen would glow white to show me where they might have been, but I couldn't figure out where he was. The colors and scene in general were so overbearing, and finally, a thought had struck me. I had lost my friend. I moved forward, both in awe at what I was seeing, and yet at the same time upset because I couldn't experience this with the friend I had experienced the rest of the game with. I was distraught, and I could never truly enjoy the scene in front of me because it had no meaning behind it if I couldn't spend it with the friend I had made. At times, I'd see some red in the distance, but it would be for naught when I realized it was a red-clothed friend, here to celebrate with me during my apotheosis. Begrudgingly, I moved forward, still frantically searching for my friend more than enjoying the scenery in front of me. I came upon the red gate that I had a feeling signified the end, and I walked through, still moving slowly just in case that I might be surprised. But life had taught me at this point not to expect a miracle, and so my realism way of thinking weighed me down as I flew forward. As I landed, I turned immediately around, thinking that perhaps he'd been behind me the entire time, but there was no one. I waited a couple minutes longer, still clinging to some hope, but to no avail. But as I had thought of moving the camera, I noticed a golden figure in the distance coming towards me. And sure enough, a hooded figure had landed perfectly next to me, giving a single chirp. I was elated, and I nearly burst into tears as my friend landed right next to me. I circled him happily, chirping as often as I possibly could. I had thought maybe this was a different player or something along those lines, but as he chirped back, I knew then and there that this couldn't have been anyone else but the friend I had traveled with together. And so, we walked forward, as usual, never leaving each other's side, through the mountaintop that we'd seen for so long, and completed our journey. After the beautiful credits rolled, something showed up that I wasn't expecting. A screen appeared displaying the words, "Companions met along the way." When I looked at this screen, a huge grin crept on my face, and any and all doubt in that moment was washed away. There in the list was only one name. I immediately opened up my messages and I wrote to them, and as I nearly hit the send button, they had messaged me first, We had a long back and forth between each other talking about the game, and every single nuance that he had shown to me in the game proved to be true. I wish I could end this by saying we became best friends or something, but sadly that's not true. We never really spoke to each other afterwards, but I really don't mind. We had both gone together on a journey that I won't soon forget. Journey was a game that left one of the most profound impacts on me that I've ever experienced. For the first time in my life, I'd actually connected with someone in a way that I had never done before. I always knew people thought I was weird or strange or whatever, and I knew at the same time I probably would never be able to communicate with anyone without some sort of issues. And yet through this one experience, I learned so many things, and not just about myself, but of others. It's thanks in large part to this game that I began to take risks with a lot of choices, to finally decide to talk to others and make those connections. To put it another way, I had gained, perhaps subconsciously, some form of self-acceptance because I learned the importance of communication through more than just words. Even if I come across as awkward, maybe I can find ways to convey what it is I want to convey to others in a different manner and finally achieve that normalcy I had so desperately wanted. The inspiration this game gave me goes far beyond that as well. I told you at the beginning of this video that I gave a speech on this particular game. I'm very shy and awkward in person, so I assumed that in public speaking I would do the worst. When I gave my speech on this game, I had received applause from my fellow classmates. And even better, of the class of 24, only 2 people had received a perfect score on that speech. I was one of those 2. Later, I had another college speech to give about someone and how they defined success. Realizing that Austin Wintory had been a relatively unknown composer before this game, and achieving some awards never before given to video games, I decided he would be a perfect candidate for this speech. And once again, Journey continued to impact my life in unexpected ways, and the answers he gave me weren't just satisfactory for a simple public speaking assignment, they were life-changing. In fact, after that speech, the teacher came up to me after class and told me it was one of the most inspirational speeches she'd ever heard in her 15 years of teaching. And as you might have guessed, I got a perfect score on that speech too. Should it so happen that Austin Wintory or anyone from that game company who worked on Journey are watching this, I want to say thank you. Thank you for creating a game that granted me so many opportunities, and for creating perhaps one of the greatest experiences I've ever had with a video game. It helped me in ways I never knew anything ever could have. And so, to close this video, I'm going to leave you with a quote from Austin Wintory in the email he sent me about success. What I would like to add is, I would encourage you not to overly scrutinize the answer I give you or anyone else might give you. Ultimately, success is going to come the way you define it and no other way. Don't try to look for hidden secrets in what other people have said, because ultimately, the people that became successful did so by finding a path that cannot be reproduced. Part of my path involved meeting that game company and working on Flow and then on Journey, or meeting certain filmmakers like Paul Soleil, who directed Grace. These are one-off experiences. You won't meet those same people or the analogy to them in whatever path you pursue. Whether it's become an accountant or lawyer or doctor or mechanic or architect or an artist or a paleontologist or an astronomer or a janitor or you name it, the people you meet, the opportunities that you have, they are all going to be extremely subjective to your life, which means that you'll just have to listen to your gut and take the plunge when it feels right to you in those moments. So ultimately, I think anything I tell you is more like an interesting story, but it should not be a guidepost for how to go about doing things.